Croeso Matthew heno. Matthew Collings yn artist, awdur sy'n byw yn Norfolk ac yn Ffrainc. Ganed yn 1955 yn Llundain. Mae wedi ysgrifennu a chyflwyno llawer o raglenni teledu am gelf gan gynnwys cyfres chweran ar Sianel 4 This is Modern Art a enillodd nifer o wobrau gan gynnwys Bafta. So Matthew Collings is an artist, a writer living in Norfolk and France. So welcome, Matthew, tonight for the talk. He was born in 1955 in London. He has written and presented many TV programmes about art, including the Channel 4 six-part series, This is Modern Art, which won many awards, including a Bafta. Mae Matthew hefyd yn awdur llawer o lyfrau ar gelf. Ei gyntaf, Blimey, From Bohemia to Britpop, the London Art World from Francis Bacon to Damien Hirst, cyhoeddwyd gan David Bowie. Galwodd Artforum y cyhoeddiad yn lyfr gelf cyfoes fwyaf poblogaidd erioed. Matthew is also the author of many books on art. His first, Blimey, From Bohemia to Britpop, the London Art World from Francis Bacon to Damien Hirst, was published by David Bowie. Artforum called it the most popular contemporary art book. Nid yw Matthew wedi cael unrhyw addysg ffurfiol ar wahân i astudio celf yn yr ysgol gelf. Mae wedi bod yn beintiwr erioed. Ers 25 mlynedd, mae wedi creu peintiadau haniaethol cydweithredol gyda'i bartner moseicydd Emma Brigg. Mae rhain mewn llawer o gasgliadau rhyngwladol. Matthew has had no formal education apart from studying at art school. He has always been a painter, and for 25 years he has created collaborative abstract paintings with his partner, mosaicist Emma Briggs. These are in many international collections. Dros y 4 blynedd diwethaf, mae Matthew wedi bod yn gweithio ar gyfres parhaus o filoedd lawer o ddarluniau yn cyfleu hanes celf amgen. I ddechrau, gwerthwyd ar Instagram i brynwyr helaeth o bobl cyffredin, tuag at hefyd Tracy Emin, Anthony Gormley, Keith Tyson, Sean Scully. Mae'n bellach hefyd yn cael ei gwerthu mewn orielau gelf a ffeiriau gerdd. Ar hyn o bryd mae'n paratoi llyfr yn seiliedig arnynt. For the past 4 years, Matthew has been working on an ongoing series of many thousands of drawings depicting an alternative art history. Initially sold on Instagram to a vast fringe of buyers, from ordinary people to Tracy Emin, Anthony Gormley, Keith Tyson, Sean Scully. They are now also sold at galleries and art fairs. He is currently preparing a book on them. Bydd Matthew yn trafod ei gwaith fel arlunydd, ei gred yw nid yn unig bod hanes celf amgen yn ddymunol, ond am gymdeithas hollol amgen yn ogystal. Matthew will give a talk this evening about his work as a drawer, his belief that not only an alternative art history is desirable, but also an entirely alternative society.
Well, hello everybody, thanks for coming. And to anyone looking at it later when it's as a recording, thanks for watching that. Yeah, I've been doing these drawings for 4 years or so. I don't know really how they started. I don't really know what the unconscious impulse was to do them. I started doing them for a banal reason, which was that there was a platform on Instagram called the Artist Support Pledge to do with the lockdown. And some of you may have heard of that. It was a system where artists suffering from financial hardship in the lockdown could offer a work of art for a relatively small amount of money, anything up to £200, and say it's on the Artist Support Pledge. And if they managed to sell £1,000 worth, so that would be, 5 at £200, or many more if you only sold them for 50 quid or something. But if you managed to sell £1,000 worth, then you pledged to buy a work of art from somebody else on the Artist Support Pledge. So I saw this thing happening. I think it started in about May of the first lockdown year. And I didn't think anything of it. I thought it'd be embarrassing to put anything on it in case somebody didn't because nobody bought it. Because you'd be out there in the public, you put a work of art on and no one wanted it, and everyone would know. And then towards the end of that year, I did put something on. It was such a humble visual item. It was a rummy score because I play rummy with my wife often, and I doodled a sort of design over the score without thinking, without even really looking at the paper. And I thought it looked quite nice. I thought, well, if it's only a rummy score, it's not that humiliating if no one buys it. So I put it on the artist support pledge, and it immediately sold. And I was so impressed; it was unbelievable. So I put a few more things on. They all sold, and I was so well. I couldn't believe it because four of those, that's £800, and I was so impressed. I said, I'll bring them round. I live in Norfolk, and these people who bought the things lived in places like Hackney, so I had to drive down. But by the time I said, I'll come on Tuesday, and by the time I went down, I'd sold a load more. So I had very many deliveries. I spent all day delivering around London. And then within a few weeks, I was selling everywhere, or many, like 7 a day sometimes, all around the world. And that went on for a couple of years. For a couple of years, I made on that funny little artist support pledge. I made probably more money per year than I've ever made, apart from a very peak period of doing TV work about 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and the money was a sort of a encouragement that somebody believed, that somebody was convinced by these drawings. A lot of artists spend most of their lives struggling to get a few shows and a few sales. And that's not the reason they do art. They do it out of some, inner compulsion. It's probably all they can do. And very few of us ever have any great financial success. And we accept that that's the way it is. If you do have a lot of sales, or if you even have one sale or a couple of sales, you realize it's a sort of feedback from an audience that something's happening, that your work is different now. It used to be a private thing between you and art history, or you and your fantasies of when you were at art school. Some kind of culture of art was created. And if you didn't go to art school, it's something in your head. If you're selling, then there's a public. And if there's a public, then there's a dialogue. So something is coming back. Even if you don't want it to come back, it's coming back anyway. And it changes what you do. And that is what I found. That as soon as those things started selling, I was kind of listening. It was a sort of radar out. I thought, well, what do people understand? And this brings me around to the fact that I'm now writing a book based on these drawings. What do people understand these drawings to be? So there was the question of what they wanted, and then there was what they understood. And were those two the same things? They seemed to want, because soon after I started, there was a scandal about Philip Guston. And it's probably forgotten now, that scandal, because he's such a popular artist. But the scandal was over whether, if he had a show, people would be offended by images of the Ku Klux Klan, which was a very difficult concept for anyone to get in their heads if you were my age, because you'd sort of been brought up from a very young age. I was from my early 20s, thinking that Guston was an established figure in the history of art, and he did this and that. And at one point, he drew the Ku Klux Klan and drew lots of other things. He painted them. And before that, had been an abstract expressionist, and he'd changed to become this sort of figurative artist. And part of the figuration was the Klan. And suddenly there was this weird situation a few years ago where if they had a big, which is what was proposed, a big touring Guston show, and I've seen loads of Guston shows over the years. I've seen loads of Gustons in real life, and I've seen any number of actual Guston shows. Suddenly, in the new world that we live in, of various political allegiances and fragmentation and civilization kind of breaking up, and we don't know if we're all going to, if many of us are going to die in the next few months from ecocide or nuclear war or flooding or Suddenly in this new world, it was considered offensive, maybe. Guston doing pictures of the Klan. And so I was drawing Guston like mad. I must have drawn him about 200 or 300 times since over the last 4 years. But certainly at that time, I must have drawn him about 100 times. And all of them, in those days, everything I drew sold straight away. Now it's a harder slog to get them sold. But so there was a dialogue, there was feedback, and I found almost like iron filings being sent in a certain direction. I was drawing a lot of Guston's because he was a controversial figure. But I found that instinctively the figures that I drew in art history were ones that I thought of as the sacred cows of this moment. The painters mostly, because it's been a painting sort of dominated art world for the last few years. And so I was instinctively drawing painters, but also I kind of, only ever did painting at art school. Although I've been on TV and presented programs of all sorts of art. My natural instinct is painting and art forms around painting. And I think of these drawings as paintings, really. They're just sort of drawn versions of paintings. So I was drawing people like Frida Kahlo and de Kooning and Jackson Pollock and Hilma af Klint and Tracy Emin and Peter Doig and I said Jackson Pollock, didn't I? And some of the women abstract expressionists, Joan Mitchell, Lane de Kooning, and Hieronymus Bosch and Salvador Dali and Marcel Duchamp. Big figures that painters perhaps orient their way by the stars. Those are the big stars. Painters know what they mean. And I did them instinctively because I thought about what had those figures meant to me since I was at art school. And even before art school in some cases, like, Dali or Dürer or Raphael or somebody. Or Chagall or Picasso. And then those are the people that I return to all the time because they're at the moment they're important. And then I do everybody because once I'd done a couple, I realized that I was doing a kind of history of art, or I was certainly drawing figures from art history, mostly modernist, in a broad sense of modernism, but also cave art, Renaissance art, the early modernism like Impressionism, and Baroque art and Elizabethan miniaturists. I just sort of trawl over the whole thing, but on the whole, it was a sort of modernist area. It was almost as if there was two of me, one observing what I was doing and one just doing it. And the one doing it did it compulsively and impulsively and without thinking in advance. I'd sometimes just draw some eyes. I didn't know if there'd be Hilma af Klint's or de Kooning's. And then, sort of impulsively make the drawing. And the making of the drawing as a nice, attractive visual proposal was one thing. And then the making of the drawing as an idea was another thing. And the idea would be, here is a fantasy or a set of lies or some surrealism or a joke or a sincere picture, but in a kind of joke form, which is a bit cartoonish. Here are people that you have heard of. If you're looking at my site on Instagram or Facebook, you're there because you're an artist and you've heard of me because I've done programs and books. And so I don't think you haven't heard of these people. I'm not surprised actually that some people hadn't heard of some of them, but on the whole they had. So here they are, and they're doing things. They're in their studio doing things. But of course it was a made up studio and there were made up faces. And I sometimes look at photos of the artists, but on the whole I don't very much because photos give me too much information. So they're made up faces, they're made up arms and legs and clothing and light bulbs. And the studios all look like one studio. There's always floorboards and tubes of paint and pots of paint and brushes. Whether it's Julie Meritou who has a vast array of different types of technology and innumerable assistants, and it's like a factory system. I would draw Julie Meritou in the same studio as Jackson Pollock, as I would draw Jackson Pollock's studio, with all scruffy and Jackson Pollock would always be smoking. Julie Meritou not, because she's nowadays. So anyone from the 50s is always smoking in my drawings, and anyone from nowadays, of course, isn't, because we don't do that anymore. And so the concept was, here are people that you've heard of, and they're doing things in this picture. And sometimes they're doing the things they really did, and sometimes they're doing things that they could never do, and sometimes figures are meeting each other who could never meet. Francis Bacon would meet Hilma af Klint in the Colony Room or somewhere, or there'd be 12 artists from different eras who'd all be meeting. And that's the concept. But then there was an aesthetic side to the drawings, in that they're very made works. I work impulsively, I get the thing down, but then I keep changing it and fiddling with it, so that there are spaces and shapes and lines and colours, and they're in a kind of taut balance. And to me, that's quite abstract, actually. I suppose I think in a kind of parallel way when I'm drawing. I don't really think very much, well, that's Hilma af Klint, what do I think about her? I more think about, where is she, and where will her arm be? And is she working on an easel, or has she got something laid out on the floor? And is she in hell, or is she in her studio, or is she in a seance, or is she meeting Philip Guston, and are they having a talk with Van Gogh or something? And so maybe we could, maybe Gwen, you could put some of those pictures up. And as I realized that it was really a world of relative values, that there's the artists, what they are. That's a picture of, yeah. Oh, look, amazing. Let's have a look at that the next picture. Number 2. Yeah, so that's a very straight picture, actually. That's the Colony Room, and at the middle at the top is Frank Auerbach, who's just died, and above him is a poster of Francis Bacon, the Bacon show that Bacon had at the Grand Palais the night that George Dyer died. That's an ad for it. You might be able to see the word bacon, and in that orangey yellow thing is a kind of a bullfight. It's a reproduction of a painting by Bacon. So there's Lucien Freud, Frank Auerbach, and Bacon up the top there. And in the next row is one of the Cray twins, and Muriel Belcher, and Joan Plowright. And the guy whose actual name I always forget, but who played Hook in Zulu, is with Joan Plowright, because there are a couple of actors who used to go to the Colony Room. And below them is Isabel Rawsthorne, and there's a photo of Henrietta Moraes on the bar, a photo by John Deakin that Bacon famously used a lot to paint a woman on a bed. So that's picture. All the drawings are done in Faber-Castell coloured pencils, and that material is supplemented by the use of Woody Stabilo children's crayons. That's a very greasy, opaque crayon. I don't know if anybody knows it, but it sort of makes a more painterly effect. A coloured pencil is of course quite light, even if it's a strong colour, whereas these Woody Stabilos are heavy, and really make a painterly surface. Can we have a look at the next picture, Gwen? Because Auerbach just died, I've done a few of him, and that's Auerbach being welcomed into Baroque heaven by Tintoretto. So this is a not straight picture. The other one was pretty straight. It's people's fantasies about the Colony Room. Everyone thinks, wow, that must have been a very pungent situation, full of characters, with Francis Bacon at the centre, and there is no heaven. That's that's a kind of that's a very interesting metaphor that we have had as people for a higher set of values that we seek to get our bearings by in life, and that's the ideal of heaven and the ideal of religion. And religion is either a philosophy, which is very, very important, or it's a work of literature, which is also very important, or it's a sort of social system, which is very important and can be for the good or the bad. And being social is usually a mixture of both historically. And for the last 100 years, we delighted in dancing on the grave of religion, if we're English or British, and certainly sort of modern liberals find it hilarious to think, oh my God, people used to believe in God, which is a very sort of inadequate idea of what it meant to be religious. It wasn't that you believed in a big fairy in heaven who made things happen or not if you prayed to them. But in any case, religion appears a lot in my drawings, often lightheartedly, but it's a very important subject because it's, for me, because it's a sort of system of world values. It's how we think about things, or it has been. And so politics is another, and ethics is another, and art is another, and there are various forms of art. And then there's artlessness and not being educated and being instead imbued with sort of fantasies and ideas by the media, which is a new kind of, which is what has replaced religion. And because we're so saturated by that kind of knowledge, we never ask ourselves what it is. We don't realize that it's just corporations who want to sell things. So there's no sort of consumer higher values. All consumerism is hell, really, in religious terms. And actually, all sort of hellish situations in the world can be ascribed to corporate influence, really. Anyway, Tintoretto welcomes Auerbach into heaven because Auerbach's died. So let's have the next picture, if it's possible to get it up there. And I don't know if everybody's little panel that shows who's watching the talk is covering Francis Bacon, but as mine is. But there's Francis Bacon on the side there. And there's a painting by Francis Bacon on the wall, which is a portrait of George Dyer and Lucian Freud. And over on the other side of the piece of paper, they're all A4 size, these drawings, is Auerbach and Lucian Freud. And they're all at a Bacon private view. And Lucian Freud and Bacon are avoiding each other because they notoriously fell out after a while. They used to be friends and they fell out because of jealousy, really. And they never spoke to each other. They were friends for a long time, very close friends. And then kind of frenemies, and Auerbach was always a genial figure. He didn't have the sort of Mephistophelian element that Lucian Freud and Bacon have in the different ways. He was a genial figure socially, and he didn't really do much socializing because he worked hard from early in the morning till nighttime and then went to sleep and got up again and did the same thing again. Very rarely socialized anyway. But when he did socialize, he sometimes did it with Freud and Auerbach. Bacon and Auerbach. Bacon and Freud. So let's have another picture. So these are the kinds of pictures that I'm making a book about that's called An Alternative Art History. But these drawings are drawings that people own, and sometimes they go in exhibition. So this is a shot of a recent art fair that some of these were sold in. And on the left is a very recognizable figure, and on the right is a very recognizable figure. On the left, that's a pretty straight drawing of Magritte with a fairly well-known painting of a man in a bowler hat with a dove superimposed over the hat. And then there's Magritte's famous pipe. This is not a pipe. And then on the right is Andy Warhol, and he's somehow joined with his canned soup painting. He's joined John Lennon and Yoko Ono in their bed-in the 60s. So as well as artists, like we all know who artists are, there's also art, as I see it, that takes a more pop form. So Warhol himself is a sort of crossover figure, really. But there's quite a lot of rockers in my book about alternative art. From my period, really, and well, from the period when I was about 13 or 14, when music was very intensely appreciated by me, and like a lot of people, as I got older, there wasn't really room in my mind really to have that intensity because there were lots of other things going on. But young boys, when they're in their very early teenagers, are very passionate about music. So all the meanings of music sink in, the sort of hypnotic rhythms, but also the iconography of music and the figures of music and the ideas of music and the ideas attached to music culture. And Gwen mentioned in the introduction that I didn't have any formal education, and that's quite true. After about the age of, for one reason or another, after about the age of 13, I never had a lesson again in my life. But I went to art school, and in art school, I was sort of forced to learn to think. And I got hold of that task, and I sort of enjoyed it, really. It was great thinking, the first time I'd already done it, and I had to make my own discipline of it. And it led really to the books and TV programs that later on I did. And it, I just had to find out for myself what art was. And in finding out what art was, I had to find out what culture was. And I had to find out what meaning is and the different layers of meaning that we live by. And I don't know how I had little models of it, conceptual models, and I just applied them to different contexts. So I sort of, the things that I knew about music that anyone knows, I applied to conceptual art or Edgar Wind and Panofsky and Regal and the 19th, early 20th century writers who tell us what Renaissance art is and what the difference is between painterly painting and linear painting. I think, oh, maybe that's the difference between Pink Floyd and the Doors or something. That would be a starting point, and I'd try and work it out how they really matched up. So when I put things together in the drawings that don't really go together, in my mind they always have gone together. And I suspect that in everyone's minds there is incongruity rather than congruity. And what we look for an art book for, a popular art book or even an academic art book, is clarity, and somebody artificially and with great strained effort doing something that we don't do, which is to organize and categorize and limit and thus be more intense in communicating knowledge. The way we turn over knowledge is we're only half really engaged. Half of it is our unconsciouses doing the work for us. And a part of it is stuff coming in our brains all the time from the outside, and also stuff that we learnt when we were young, which is in the back of our minds, and it's all bubbling away, despite our conscious selves. And my drawings, let's have the next picture, and this book that I'm doing is, my drawings an alternative history of art, and the book is an alternative history of art. It's basically a picture book. It's all these drawings with captions, and the thoughts that I'm telling you now are somehow fit into those captions. And the drawings themselves compress and convey visually these thoughts. And these thoughts are really about, as much as a history of art, they're an inquiry into what is art. At least what do we think art is now? And what is the we who's doing the thinking? Because I don't know who, because you're not real people to me, you're just virtual people, and I can't even see you. I can see Gwen, but so I can't ask you if any of you know who the two people on the right are. The person on the left is me when I was at art school in the 70s. I went to the Bayern Shore, and there's these drawings are pinned up on the wall in a hotel. It was in Frieze Art Week. There was this trendy hotel that had a big event where every room was a gallery. Just now. And so I had all my drawings pinned up, and then people come in and buy them for about £400 plus £80 VAT each one. And as they were sold, those pins will come out and they take the drawing away. And usually when I sell them, people buy them on Instagram, then I post them to them. They have a complicated system where I have to go to the post office, I have to keep the record of everything, I take the packages in and fill in all the customs forms and I send them out. So these are the objects when they're sold in a gallery or an art fair in this case. And some of the people who came in that room knew who some of the people in the drawings were, but most of the people who came in hardly knew who any of them were. And some people who came in didn't know who any of them were, and maybe one or two people came in and knew who absolutely everybody was. The titles always tell you who they are, but that's one thing to be told that somebody is Bruce Nauman, but it's another thing if you already know who Bruce Nauman is. And how much knowledge of Bruce Nauman do you have? And you only have the knowledge of blockbuster shows of the last 20 or 30 years, or do you have the knowledge that I have of 50 years ago, first hearing about him when there'd never been any shows of him apart from in LA and New York, 50 or 60 years. I don't know how old I am now. Well, I'm 70. Yeah. So when I was at art school, everything was random. I mean, I was influenced by, I don't know if you can see on the screen, but there's pop art in the picture, and there's Jasper Johns and Hockney, and there's Hockney's swimming pool picture up there. And there's me making things with a brush and paint. I'm reading John Cage. I don't know who he is, but I suppose I thought I ought to read him because I like Jasper Johns. One of the tutors said, "Oh, he's got something to do with John Cage." So I read these books that were impossible to take seriously or understand, or but I forced myself to read them. And there are people everyone's smoking because it's 1974. There are people painting lyrical, sincere pictures of vases of flowers. There are people at the top of the picture having a lecture about pop art. They're all smoking away. And there's someone painting a sincere abstract. So they're learning about pop art on the right up there, and on the left, someone's painting an abstract. And I'm reading Artforum. I have no idea what those articles mean. They seem offensively difficult to understand, but I feel I've got to find that out. And then on the right, that's de Kooning in 1957, when Jackson Pollock had died only a few months before, and he started having an affair with Ruth Kligman, who was in the car when Jackson Pollock died. And she escaped with a hip injury, and Eve Metzger, her friend, was killed in the car crash, and Pollock was thrown through the air, and his head hit a tree. He's thrown 10 feet through the air. I think it was 10 feet high and thrown 40 feet through the air. His head hit a tree and he died. And very soon after that, when a hit was better, I assume, Ruth, who was a beautiful young woman of about 22 or something, started having an affair with de Kooning, which was much spoken about because de Kooning and Pollock were big rivals. So for him to have an affair with this young girl who'd been Pollock's girlfriend was seen as rather sort of perverse and scandalous. De Kooning has a marvelous abstract painting from 1957 called, or it might be from 1958, called Ruth Zowie. That abstract painting is pictured above his head, very small. And in Ruth's hand is a de Kooning catalogue, because she was a fan of de Kooning. And she was a bit of a groupie, actually. She's kind of an artist in her own right. I did meet her, and she's a sincere person. When I met her, of course, she was very old. But when she was young, what she was really known for was having partners who were artists. And she comes into his studio loft in Broadway, and she sees this painting. It's a marvelous new abstract painting by de Kooning. She says Zowie, and that's why de Kooning called the painting Ruth Zowie. So both of these two pictures are absolutely true. There's nothing in them that isn't true, but of course it's all lies, because they're sort of fantasies and gossip and fragments of truth. But nothing in either picture is truly surreal, and nothing is blatantly a lie, and nothing's blatantly a joke. I'm dealing with serious things. I'm putting them together, and I'm trying to say this is knowledge. This is our knowledge of art. That it's possible to be a specialist in art history, or a specialist in making, or a specialist in the social history of art, or the political history of art, or the ethical history of it, all of which would be very different and have different priorities and different figures. and I'm putting together a book based on drawings which come from my memory bank of things that I have known and thought, and my abilities, which are rudimentary, so that what happens with the drawing is that they're just a drawing. They might only be jokes, or they might be crude cartoons, or they might be very good conceptual art, or there might be paintings. In fact, I think of them as paintings. I think of them as a version in a drawn form of the genre of history painting. And history painting is, which died out in the 19th century, really, with the advent of Impressionism, probably. History painting was where a grand work would be made, depicting a subject from real history, supposedly, or mythology, which gave a moral message to the people who lived in the time that the artist made that picture, rather than expecting the picture to be accurately representative of the death of Socrates, say. Everyone played the game. The audience played the game, and the artist played the game, and educated people and less educated people played the game of thinking that's a marvelous high moment in our civilization. What's it telling us now? What are the values that it's correcting? Where have we gone wrong now? And it's remedial, and it's telling us how to be better, or etc. So I think that my drawings have a sort of remedial and moralizing meaning, and probably it's as simple as saying that I come from a different era, and that my being was sort of formed a long time ago, and has remained a lot of it has remained intact. Although, as with everybody, I've adapted to, as the decades go by, to different social ways and to different understandings of art. So this consumerism type of way of having art that we have now was unknown when I was young, because there was no it didn't function like that. Nobody who at art school expected anything better than maybe get a job teaching, and it wasn't really a money culture of art. There are very few artists who are successful, and on the whole, you were either extremely successful like David Hockney, or you were known but not considered very successful, as it were, like Frank Arbok. Funnily enough, in the 70s, he wasn't really financially successful till the 80s, really. But on the whole, the artists who came in, the visiting artists who came in to teach you, were serious figures, and they were players on the art scene, but they had no money at all. They were absolutely poverty stricken. They had less money than anybody in society. One of them, funnily enough, my tutor was Frank Bowling, who's now a mighty figure who's painting himself for $1 million each. He does one a week. But I was very influenced by Frank. He was my tutor for a year, and I found him a glamorous figure. So, had a fair bit to do with him. And after I left art school, I had a bit more to do with him. But I throw him in as an example of somebody who could be an important person in the art world. Even then he was, who had less money even than me. As a student, I got £1,000 a year grant. You probably didn't even have that much in those days. So let's have the next picture. So I'm showing you these pictures. The one on the right is a bit like the one we just saw of John and Yoko in bed, and this time they're in bed with Gandhi. So it's an obvious connection that he's Mr. Peace and they're Mr. and Mrs. Peace. And there's the Beatles' White Album. Anyone who, well, maybe some of you collect vinyl, but there's the White Album had on, the famous Apple core, CORP. There was Apple, that not the Apple that we have now makes computers, but there was the Beatles label Apple, and the label design was an apple cut in half, which you can see in the center of the record. So there's the two records of the Beatles double White Album, and there's also John Cage's book Silence, because Yoko Ono introduced John Lennon to the notions of fluxus, of which Cage was a luminary. And there's John's guitar on the bed, and they're reading a book, and I'm not sure what it is. I think it's a book maybe that Gandhi has written. It's an essay by Gandhi. And out of the window is society going on, polluting the atmosphere and causing the war in Vietnam, and being really horrible and leading to the absolute inferno that we all now live in. And anyway, they're all trying to promote peace. And that's a self-portrait, actually, at one of the shows that I was just saying, where the pictures are pinned on the wall on the left there. So if we go on to the next one. So this is what the book is going to be made of. It's made of pictures like this, which not many of them that you've seen here have been very historic. Most of them have been in the last few decades. This is Guston painting the Klan, who I mentioned. And in this one, Guston, who died 40 years ago, more than that, nearly 45 years ago, because he's known, why he's a sacred cow of art now is that people think that he looked at society. He's an artist who turned away from doing art about art and forms that just considered forms, to painting the world and painting his own thoughts and things that concerned him, and his anxiety and his intensity. And he painted the racism of America when he painted the Klan. So I get him, whenever I draw him, I get him to look at issues of now. So here he's looking at Israel and Gaza. In fact, I drew this well over a year ago, within a few weeks, when the atrocities all started. And I always get Guston to be doing something that he wouldn't really couldn't possibly have done because he was years ago. But what he could well do if were he alive now. He's sort of considering and wondering, and he's thinking, who is evil? You know, am I evil? Is it the Israeli atrocities on Gaza that are evil? What is evil anyway? You know, he's worrying and angsting about what's the role of art. Should art change things, or should art be beautiful? Or, you know, he had a famous quote about all these terrible things are going on. Am I supposed to just be thinking, should I adjust this red with this blue? And the implication of that is that you should somehow grasp the terrible things, that an artist must somehow must have something to say. But he didn't necessarily want the direct thing to be said. He thought that art on its own terms should deal with the world. You know, an art is about ambiguity, not just visual. You know, design in art is always about ambiguity. It's rich. The more ambiguous it is, the richer it is, actually. If you can have a stamped out image and ambiguity, that's great art. But it's also about, you know, moral ambiguity, because it has so many hundreds of years of tradition of intense meaning that can live and live and live. So there'll be an obvious message, but many, many meanings that are not to do with the obvious message. So all the crucifixions that we've ever seen, they tell you the same thing about some story in the Bible, but they're replete with all the meanings of life, of absolutely everything that's of any concern to anybody is in the great crucifixion paintings. So in my book, I'm getting Guston often to turn over these problems, whereas Hilma af Klint, when she appears, she's turning over problems of spirituality. De Kooning is turning over problems of style and the purpose of style, or why art adheres to one look but can then jump into other looks, and what is skill? Why does art have skill, and what happens when you explode skill? Anyway, so they all have they ask questions, and those questions and some of their conclusions, or conclusions that I'm putting into their mouths, are in the captions that tell you what each picture is. So the book basically has a picture per page and then a little caption underneath. Sometimes the caption's a bit longer, and sometimes the page only has text, but it's just a block of text in the middle. So all the time the book is turning over issues of why we like art, why we have it. If we live in this world, how come we go around saying, oh, great, you know, we've got the Frieze Art Fair, when the Frieze Art Fair is sponsored by Lufthansa, and Lufthansa has a very dodgy role in Israel and Gaza. Shouldn't we be complaining about that? But then the minute we do complain about that, don't we have to complain about everything? Because is anything really free from pollution? And that's why, if you think back to Gwen's introduction, the book is about a different, it's called an alternative history of art, or it's called alternative art history. It offers you an alternative art history because I want to offer an alternative world. I'm hoping that our world can be transformed before we all die. I hope die violently because it hasn't been transformed. I hope it can be transformed to a world that is more humane. And the world that culture often refers to, high culture and low culture, but that culture refers to, since culture is always telling us about things that are ideals or models or concentrated condensations of the good. So when it shows us evil, when it delights in evil or dances around evilly or paints witches, if Goya paints Satan and the devil, art and culture, they do that in order to consider how life can best be lived. What's the most fulfilled humanity that we can have? So we just go through the last ones. We'll be getting towards the end of the talk, really, and you'll see a bit more about. I hope that I'll have conveyed, the concerns of the book, the texture of the book, like what it physically is as an object. Every page is a drawing a bit bigger than you're seeing it on the screen, not quite the A4 original size. Are there a few more to go, Gwen, or is that the last one? Oh, those are that's Guston in the 70s. He's drawing the Klan and he's fondly remembering the abstract expressionists. They're all at the Cedar Bar, and there's of the 40s and 50s, some of which he never met. I don't think he ever met Gorky. But there's Gorky as Rothko in the middle, and behind Rothko is Pollock, and on the right is de Kooning. And I don't know, I've got a whole list of people's names like Sheila and Craig and Gwyn and me. So you can't see that figure on the right. But that's, I'll have to remember who that is. Who could that be? Because they're always the same. Anyway, the one at the front is Franz Klein at the bottom. That's Guston on the left. So we'll all have to just guess who that is on the right. But that's Gorky, who hanged himself before Guston ever met him. And let's go through quite quickly. These are great Jewish achievers. And that's Chagall is painting a beautiful, when I was young, I just assumed that everyone loved Chagall, but I also assumed that Chagall was only the early Chagall. I didn't really know about the late, more insipid Chagall. But that's Chagall painting a pair of flying lovers, and he's surrounded by Maya Shapiro, who's an art historian, Hannah Arendt in the top left, who's a philosopher, Mark Rothko, the artist, and on the right, Sigmund Freud. And that's what I think, when I'm told I'm an anti-Semite because I criticize Israel, I've absolutely, I reject that. And also I just don't know what they mean. There is no, there's no issue of Jewish contribution, Jewish cultural contribution. It's obviously huge. Nobody who was an artist in the 20th century could have not felt the impact of Rothko or Chagall, or could not have had their minds to some extent formed by Freud. And anyone who's ever done any thinking could not have encountered Hannah Arendt. And anyone who's read seriously any art history could not have encountered Maya Shapiro. So because of the events that are unfolding at the moment, and certainly had been unfolding anyway, and have been, for years, with the problem of American sort of poisonous belligerent dominance of the world, one can't help, I think, if you think that arts must somehow do something about the world and about problems, one can't help thinking about the issue of Israel-US and the difficulties that the world has been thrown into because of that tie-up, since they are both really identical with each other. And so this is my sort of challenge to people who degrade and make meaningless the Holocaust, the horror of the Holocaust, by weaponizing it for political purposes at the moment. So let's go on for some more on that. Does anyone know who that is? That's Lowry painting a man posting a letter. Let's see the next one. That's Eva Hess. She's looking at a Jasper Johns catalogue. There's a photo of Jasper Johns on the back. And there's a glimpse of a Jasper Johns target painting. And in the background is one of her own circular grey drawings of, concentric circles. It was typical of the forms that she used. As you can see, she's smoking. That's Vasari. Vasari writing the first art book. I like art books and books about art that try and explain what art is. And there's paintings that he's done for the Medici. And basically his first page of his book is that all art done in Florence is good and everywhere else is no good. So that sort of sums up his contribution to art history. But of course he's an essential guy to read if you want to know about the Renaissance. There's his cat in the corner, there's a bottle of ink on the table. And that's, in a way, that's a surrogate for me. But in a way, they all are surrogates for me. And I don't see how I could avoid them being that. But they're me if I was better than I am, or higher than I am, or more ideal than I am. When I appear myself, it's as I really am, which is incoherent, sort of stuttering and not being able to keep a straight line in any conversation. I think we must be getting to the end of them now. Oh, that's Lou Reed and Andy Warhol going out west to stare in a stoned way at Clifford Still's palette knives, which are in the front there. And there's Clifford Still in the background, mixing up some... maybe some of you know that Clifford Still, whenever he had a big painting to do for a corporation, he'd take his pigments and some of his equipment, he'd mix up the paint there and then, and he'd get the canvas and he'd get it all done and do it in situ sometimes. So obviously that could never have happened. That's David Bowie and Alice Neal in heaven, as kind of communicating spiritually. What's the next one? And that's Guston painting Captain Tom and wondering about Nixon and Boris Johnson and the Klan. He's wondering if Captain Tom was a hero or was somehow Captain Tom's genuine heroism was kind of weaponized for the elevation of Johnson, really. And then the next one is Georges Bataille, because I draw cave art a lot. This is a sort of ad for Bataille, he wrote many books about prehistoric art, but a very good one is The Cradle of Humanity, which actually he didn't write that book. That's a collection of some of his essays on prehistoric art. And this might be the last one. This is Kittai, who I think is an interesting study of an artist who was kind of good and also offensive and bad, really. And this is his red light districtism. He drew all these sort of porny pictures of nude women, which I think were incredibly gone wrong, really. It was Kittai's good skills gone wrong. But nevertheless, it's part of what he did. And when Kittai was right, and he was very influential on me when I was at art school, because he dealt with some of these issues in the 70s of should art be formal or should it be humanistic? And, since then, that conversation abides in a way. Its essence abides, but the terms wouldn't really be like that. And, I think at the moment the idea is, should art be aware of the art world's utter corruption and tell you about it, and should it fight it, or should it ignore it and because it's got other better things to do? And if it's got better things to do, what are they? How can they be so good that they don't care that all art is shown in this context of wealth evil, really? It's corporations are nothing but the shareholders making profits, and the reason we have imminent destruction of the planet is because of corporations destroyed the ecosystem for money. And there's a sort of Marxist materialist idea of what's wrong with things and what we should do is still a salient and relevant one. that it's really class war. And class war is money, the wealthy using money, which is a sort of should be a neutral sort of system, using it as war. So Kitai was a very good. He was a sort of narcissistic guy who got into all sorts of problems, was a little bit mad, and got madder and madder. But he was very good in the 70s at polemicizing about issues that were very, very intense and important at the time, and which sank in with people of my generation. And so I often draw him a little bit satirically, but I always draw him satirically with respect, because I believe that he did help the world and make a contribution. That if that's not the last one, we should go quickly through the last ones, because it's probably time to draw. Okay, that is the last one. So this book, I'm working on it, and I have done loads of TV programs and popular books in the past, and this is within that stream. And the only difference is that it's primarily visual rather than, a TV program is a TV program and a popular book where you chat and gossip is a book. And this is more like a funny sort of comic, really, an adult comic. And I don't know when it's coming out, but I hope it'll be the end of next year.
Diolch yn fawr iawn am y sgwrs na hyn, oedd yn hyfryd clywed am y lluniau ac edrychwn ymlaen i weld y llyfr. Thank you very much for that talk this evening. It was lovely to see all the images and we really look forward to seeing the book. If you want to join the Friends, please visit our website. Os hoffech ymuno â'r ffrindiau, please ewch i'n wefan.